The pattern is mechanical, not personal, and it appears in any group where responsibility is diffused and status is at stake. Because the costs of moving first are immediate, while the costs of waiting are distributed and delayed, signals arrive as fragments, often incomplete and uncomfortable to hold, and each recipient narrows the field of action by role, by hierarchy, by precedent, and by the need to avoid blame more than they need to achieve a result. The design favors inaction because inaction keeps everything legible. Calendars are met, processes are followed, and no one needs to admit that a decision was made on partial information. Wrong action is visible and punishable. Wrong inaction is quiet and shared. The social math is simple. It is safer for one person to be late with everyone than to be early alone. Individuals inside the structure explain their position to themselves with clean logic that aligns with policy and culture, so the delay feels like judgment rather than avoidance. They point to the lack of certainty, the absence of final authority, the need for more data, or the risk of upsetting a fragile alignment that took months to assemble. They see escalation as a social event that must be earned, not a practical tool to clear a block. So they wait for consensus that never arrives under any natural process. This waiting is packaged in formal language: monitoring, revisiting, socializing, validating, all of which sound like activity while functionally postponing any irreversible move. Every meeting adds a layer of shared ownership that dilutes nerve and protects status. Because a room cannot be blamed like a person can. This is why committees overrun the clock and produce nothing that commits anyone, and why a document can move through many hands without changing its state. The structure trains people to ask whether a decision is theirs to make, not whether the decision is needed now, which means the gate is closed by default and only opens under pressure from above. Risk is reframed into reputational risk rather than outcome risk, and the unit of analysis becomes the individual career, not the external stakes that prompted the first alarm. Past penalties shape present posture, and the people who are punished for false alarms become reference points, even when the present threat has none of the features that made those past alarms false. The group treats precedent as protection, even when the environment has moved. Deadlines slipped, and nothing moved forward. From the inside, the signals do not look like signals, because each fragment has a plausible explanation that preserves the original plan and pace, and because acknowledging the pattern forces someone to own a break in continuity. The first warning appears as an outlier. The second looks like an exception. The third reads as isolated noise in a big and busy system that always has noise. People who would benefit from decisive action are upstream in the hierarchy, or outside the group's social core, so their urgency is discounted as biased or impatient. The people with the most to lose from being wrong own the calendar and the agenda, so the system arranges itself around their tolerance for discomfort. The more the group values stability, the easier it becomes to write off early signs as distractions. Role boundaries make this stronger. Ownership maps poorly to risk exposure, so the person who sees the threat clearly is rarely the person with the authority to act, and the person with authority has buffers that ensure the threat arrives late and softened. This asymmetry produces staged signals. Early warnings are framed as possibilities. Mid-level assessments remove urgency, and final summaries present a tidy version that supports delay as prudence. Schedules and budgets become anchors that pull interpretation toward the least disruptive reading. No one wants to puncture a plan that has already absorbed months of work. Each person prefers to add a comment rather than remove a blockage, because comment is safe and action is not. The rhetoric of process provides a moral cover that is social rather than explicit, and it works because it is shared by everyone who would pay a price for moving early. People talk about getting more alignment and closing knowledge gaps, knowing that these phrases signal care and diligence in the organization's language, while signaling hesitation in practice. The person who asks for clarity is treated as responsible, and the person who acts without clarity is treated as reckless, even when the situation demands movement under uncertainty. This shifts the local definition of competence, away from outcomes and toward procedure. So the most competent posture is to never be the one who creates heat. The organization's memory keeps careful records of past dramatic errors, and it forgets the cases where small, quiet action avoided a larger loss. They missed the only window that mattered. Conformity to visible norms also shapes perception, because calm behavior is equated with control and control is equated with safety. So people model calm to appear competent, which others then read as signal that the situation is controlled. A closed loop forms. Calm behavior feeds calm. Interpretation. Calm interpretation feeds more delay. And every fresh signal is absorbed into the established tone. People infer from silence that someone else is handling it, without a named person or a documented plan. Because distributed responsibility feels like coverage, even when it is only dilution. The team builds dashboards, sends updates, and offers acknowledgements. And these artifacts create the impression that action exists. Even when none of them commit resources or change a trajectory, the presence of activity substitutes for the presence of leverage. Inside this pattern, opposing incentives accumulate publicly. People reward prudence, care, and consensus. Privately, they judge quiet delay as clever risk management that protects careers. The simple arithmetic of asymmetry applies. If acting now can harm me, but only possibly help the group later, I will not act now. When everyone performs the same arithmetic, collective action stalls without a single explicit decision to stall, and no one can be held to the moment when the stall became irreversible. The final effect is a stable equilibrium of non-commitment, disguised as collaboration. The warning was heard and then ignored. Small moves occur and are used to create a record that looks like progress, but they are scoped to avoid accountability for large outcomes. People split actions into parts that can be marked complete without addressing the core risk, which keeps pressure down and buys time for the calendar to take the blame. Ownership remains ambiguous by design. Enough names appear in the minutes to spread credit if something works, and enough generality remains to ensure blame cannot be traced to a single actor if nothing happens. The group treats each missed moment as a near miss rather than a loss, because naming it a loss would force a reassessment of the approach that no one is willing to carry. The language shifts from we should to we'll see, then from we'll see to we'll monitor, and then the topic goes quiet. This quiet is not passive, it is strategic. Silence removes friction, and the person who raises urgency reintroduces friction, which costs them standing and future access. People learn to preserve standing by not producing friction, so the only people who push are those with less to lose, and they are easy to dismiss as inexperienced or emotional. The system reinforces itself with performance signals. Ratings favor predictable contributors over disruptive ones. Recommendations favor safe managers over decisive ones, and leadership narratives highlight calm navigators over early movers. The result is a learned bias for delay that feels like disciplined decision-making at every step. Consequences social, reputational, and structural, and it unfolds without open conflict, because no one needs to fight over a position that has already been weakened by visible hesitations and mistimings. Observers do not debate motives. They revise their internal maps of competence and relevance, and they do it with quiet certainty built from a sequence they have seen before. The person who waited is no longer read as prudent. They are read as unable to set direction under ambiguity, which is the only thing that counts at the point where timing mattered. Their title remains, their artifacts remain, and their narrative remains, but the living lines of influence move elsewhere. People redraw practical hierarchies without comment. External partners infer the same shift, because outcomes outrank explanations in every field where resources are limited, and attention follows projected success rather than stated ownership. The person who should have acted is now seen as a safe conduit for updates, rather than a node that can move resources. And requests that once arrived early begin to arrive late or not at all. Invitations narrow, side conversations exclude, and the level of information they receive drops in quality as others protect their time and align with those who can commit. Colleagues reframe them as competent in maintenance and suspect in urgency, which is a polite demotion that requires no announcement. The new decision centers form around people who did not have to be right. They only had to not be late. Their influence dried up without a fight. The reallocation of leverage is quiet because it uses default behaviors, not declarations, and it happens through channels that leave almost no formal trace. Budget approvals are routed to a different leader under the pretext of bandwidth. Calendar holds are overwritten by higher priority sessions, and key threads find a new owner for clarity. No one claims there was a failure. They claim the situation evolved, and the stated reasons are accurate enough that they do not invite challenge. The person sees their scope shrink as a series of small, reasonable adjustments that make sense in isolation, which prevents them from locating a moment to resist. What is being removed is not a task or a title. It is the expectation that they can move a deadline, set a threshold, or make a call. People stopped asking them for decisions. Mentions of the past delay become shorthand in private judgment, used to dismiss their input on future timing without saying so directly. The phrase "let's get a read from others" starts to appear after they speak, which signals that their assessment is not decisive, and that a second pass will be the real decision point. Their arguments become reference material rather than direction. And even when those arguments are sound, they do not carry the room because the room has already located momentum elsewhere. New projects select different leads out of habit, and the explanation is framing rather than substance. Fit, fresh perspective, alignment with current priorities. They retain responsibilities that are necessary but not central, and those responsibilities have no leverage on critical paths. What others see as a natural shift is experienced by them as a series of unrelated annoyances, each small enough to disregard, each easy to accept because challenging any one of them would look petty or insecure. Their access to sensitive context drops a layer, which ensures their interventions come late and underinformed, which then confirms the perception that they are not operating at the right altitude. This is how the cycle closes. Late action creates a narrative that produces later access, which pushes them further from the center where action happens early. They remain visible but no longer pivotal. The group is already priced in their absence. They were replaced before they noticed. No confrontation is necessary because the shared understanding is complete. When action was needed under uncertainty, they did not act, and the organization cannot risk that. In the next pass, respect does not vanish. It changes form from active wait to polite regard, and the difference is absolute in practice. People stop protecting their time, not out of malice, but because there are better prospects elsewhere. And attention is the first and last currency. Their team sees the shift and adjusts accordingly, taking cues from where decisions now stick, and aligning with managers who will sponsor them when timing matters. The old center remains a node, but its edges no longer connect to the live network that decides outcomes. Title protection delays the visible impact but accelerates the practical one, because it allows everyone to act on the new map without acknowledging it. Observers who once argued for their leadership stop arguing at all, which is the clearest signal that the case is closed in private. Their updates become quarterly rhythm items rather than triggers for movement, and their plans are referenced as context rather than as instructions. In reviews, feedback describes them as thoughtful and thorough, two words that read as neutral when the metric is movement. They are told nothing is wrong because nothing needs to be said when the allocation of power has already shifted. Clients and counterparts adopt the same posture. They direct urgency to people who have delivered recent movement, and they send polite courtesy notes to the person who did not, ensuring that no one can accuse them of disrespect while making sure that nothing critical depends on that channel. Opportunities arrive labeled as exploratory rather than urgent, which is just another way of saying the senders expect nothing immediate to happen there. As this accumulates, the person's calendar stays full, but the sessions with the highest stakes happen without them. Their name remains on artifacts that no longer govern reality. There is no recovery vector built into the situation because reputational memory is built from sequences, not single acts, and the relevant sequence is already complete. The set of people who might have argued for a second chance have moved to other projects and other leaders, because attachment follows movement, and movement went elsewhere. The person still speaks the language of the role, but no one hears it as authority anymore. And that is not an argument to be won. It is a weight that has already been removed. The formal system will take longer to register the change, because formal systems have lags, but the practical system is already operating on the new baseline. The next time timing matters, the call will not come to them. There's nothing left to challenge because nothing was stated. The decision happened across thousands of small choices that each looked reasonable, and together they made a final state that does not need to be announced. What is remembered is not the complexity of the situation or the fog of the early signals. What is remembered is the simple fact that the action did not occur when it was needed. From that point, the rest follows without force, and without anyone needing to admit anything. The absence is now permanent.